The following program is brought to you by the Worldwide Exemplification of Freemasonry and made possible by the research behind the building series of Uncommon Catechism for Uncommon Masonic Education, Volumes 1 through 4. The views expressed in this presentation are that of the author and do not represent any specific Grand Lodge. For those of you who are not familiar with coaching, I'll share now a quick overview. Coaching is an activity that has been around since time immemorial. Coaching activities in a variety of forms have been mentioned in literature throughout history. The word coach is one of the few English words borrowed from Hungarian. It comes from a small village in Hungary of similar name and is found between Budapest and Győr. It originally referred to the carts produced by this village and was used solely for that purpose for many years. As do many borrowed words do, coach became entrenched in English usage and eventually was used as a slang expression by students in universities to refer to instructors, tutors, and trainers who helped transport or carry them through their studies and examinations. Another word used within Masonry to convey such a supporter is mentor, which, if you know your history, was borrowed from Greek mythology. Mentor was the son of Alchemist and friend of Odysseus. It was that friendship that put Mentor, along with Odysseus's foster brother Eumaeus, in charge of Odysseus's son Telemachus and of Odysseus's palace when he left for the Trojan War. It was Mentor's job to make sure that Telemachus grew up into manhood with good orderly direction. An interesting side note to be mindful of here is that when the goddess Athena visited Telemachus, she took on the disguise of Mentor to hide herself from the suitors of Telemachus's mother Penelope. Disguised as Mentor, the goddess encouraged Telemachus to stand up against the suitors and go abroad to find out what happened to his father. When Odysseus returned to Ithaca, Athena appeared briefly in the form of Mentor once again at Odysseus's palace. If you don't recognize the Masonic connection in this, let me point out that Athena is known in Greek mythology as the goddess of wisdom, and just as Athena appeared to Telemachus and Odysseus in the guise of Mentor, so do Masons take on the guise of Mentor when they visit with their less-informed brothers who seek their light. As coaches and mentors, you are providing light for the next generation of Masons. That light may be focused strictly upon what you've been instructed. It may also include other things that were left out in your instruction but are just as important to the health and strength of the fraternity. What do instructors typically provide to those interested in the craft? They usually provide them opportunity to seek light. That light usually has to do with organizational support, as has been shared here. It can also include helping candidates execute the code, buried within the organization's ritual. One technique used by coaches to help candidates is that of asking questions. This technique has been around for at least 2,400 years as a way of teaching, and for good reason. It works extremely well in getting those who are involved in this type of discourse to think in ways that, left to their own devices, would not occur otherwise. Coaches discover quickly that this technique is powerful, and that if you have truly good questions, it doesn't matter who asks them. They will trigger valuable responses independent of the source. This may be because there is power in questions, and this power changes lives. Coaches will also discover that this power relies on the person having an invested interest in finding an answer to the question put forth. That investment starts with a simple question that is asked up front because of some desire that presents itself. That initial question triggers a quest to seek that which is desired. It continues further by knocking on doors which appear to be closed where there might be a satisfactory answer. There's another aspect of this technique that helps bring about worthwhile exchanges between both the coach and the candidate. They should both be free to ask and respond to questions. In my work with candidates, I truly hope that the questions come more from the candidate, or at least as much as they do from the coach. This shows me that the candidate has a sincere interest in knowing more about what he is engaged in. I know this to be true. My conclusion is based upon personal observation and experience. When I entered into Masonry, I was told to work with a very experienced Mason named Jack. I was in awe of his experience. He told me of his times on what he called a railroad degree team. My coach worked for the railroad in his younger days, and he would attend lodges at the various stops along his route. It didn't matter what part was not filled. If Jack was there, he would volunteer for the part without hesitation. He was experienced in every degree, in many jurisdictions, and knew all the parts by heart. Jack was my coach, and I felt extra special to be coached by a Mason with his travel experience. It was he who sat down with me to teach me the catechism required to show my proficiency in each degree. As honored as I was to have Jack as my coach, there was a problem. At the time, I didn't realize how big it was for me. The problem was that I didn't want to just learn the catechism. I wanted to understand what I was memorizing. As you might guess, there were many times I'd stop a catechism training, and rather than reply with the expected response, I would ask a question about what was just shared. Jack would just look at me for a moment. At times he knew the answer, but at other times he would tell me he didn't know and encouraged me to learn the catechism anyway, so I would progress to the next degree. I found this to be quite frustrating, but I didn't contest his recommendations. I realized he was there to help me with what he honestly could. I also realized that if I wanted to know what I was memorizing, I would have to find another path, and one that had other resources. Very shortly into my experience with Jack, I started carrying a notebook and a pen. Every time I had a question come up, I'd write it down to explore later. My curiosity was still there, unchanged, and I wanted to honor it. Jack's coaching was an excellent question raiser, and by the time I was ready to prove my proficiency in front of the lodge, I had a notebook filled with questions that I knew I wanted the answers to. I progressed through the first 3 degrees in about 1 year's time. My notebooks were filled with questions, one right after another. By the time I got my white lambskin apron, I had several notebooks filled. And it was just after the receipt of my apron that I started delving into them. I'd look through them to find a question that interested me a lot. I'd start reading everything I could find on the one question and everything that related to it. I'd ask other brothers, whom I knew would be equally curious about the question on the table. Slowly, I started finding an answer to one question after another, using every resource I could find: books, internet search engines, websites, encyclopedias, research articles, magazines. In a very short time, I amassed many answers to my questions. This caused another problem, though. The more answers I found, the more questions that came up as a result. This led to further research, answers, and more questions. I hope that you can imagine how much fun this was for me. Interestingly enough, I found that many of the questions I started out researching led me to unexpected, delightful, and sometimes disturbing directions. The greatest of all was the group of brothers that showed the same interest in light that I did. The second was what was revealed to me because of my research. What was revealed was how ritual communicated to Masons the work that they need to do to both build themselves and others. That is exactly what this presentation is about. And as you might have noticed, I've asked a few questions along the way. An important action coaches can take is to have a direct discussion with the candidate prior to accepting the coaching position. That discussion should include 2 vital topics that need to be covered in depth if the coaching relationship is to have any modicum of success. Those 2 topics are the upfront coaching agreement and being true to one's word. The coaching agreement spells out what can be expected from both the coach and the candidate. In short, a contract is a 2-fold performance contract, clearly spelling out the performance that is to be expected from both parties. It also covers default conditions should the performance of either not occur and the remedies that should occur once a default is recognized. Far too many coaches dismiss this aspect from their coaching of candidates. They take a make-up-the-rules-as-you-go approach and hence do not address upfront consequences for non-performance. As a result, their ability to coach and the success of the candidate is severely hampered. Being true to one's word is also one of the most important conversations that a coach can ever have with a candidate. Covering aspects of what being true to one's word actually means to the candidate, why it is so important to the candidate to be true to his word, and what conditions must exist for when he should not be responsible for being true to his word. This discussion will give you tremendous insight into what you can expect from the candidate in the future. You'll also know going into the relationship how your candidate views things that are important to the work before him. In turn, the candidate will have opportunities to know how you view things. As you might have suspected, these 2 two subjects force out upon the table discourse between the coach and the candidate. It requires a conversation to occur that reveals the inner thoughts about the coach-candidate relationship that would not have been assumed had the conversation not taken place. As either a coach or a candidate, you don't want to have anything go unsaid that would better support the work involved. The wonderful yet frightening thing about Freemasonry is that no one will tell you what the true secrets are. No one will teach them to you either. No one will make you learn what you need to learn. This forces Masons who want more to do what's necessary to get the work done, and sometimes do this on their own. One final note before I wrap this presentation up. There are very few checks and balances within Masonic education. The instruction is mostly mouth to ear, and it is limited to learning a set pattern of responses to inquiries given by an instructor. If the instructor believes the candidate has memorized the responses satisfactorily, then the candidate is allowed an opportunity to respond to these inquiries within lodge, so that his brothers can witness his examination. This scenario is repeated for all 3 Blue Lodge degrees. Even though Masons are supposed to be able to show proficiency in a current degree before progressing to the next, it is up to you to complete the education that ritual points you toward. No one will do it for you.